Let's take a look at tiny modern revolvers. Now, this is our own research. We encourage you to do your own and then share it with others. We're going to take a look at where these little revolvers come from, what we're using to define a modern mini revolver, the companies that make them, the people behind those companies, and then the order that they were created. Then we'll take a little quick look, or a little closer look at the major players. So to begin with, the tiny revolver literally dates back to the first cartridge ever developed, the 22 short in 1857, and the first cartridge revolver developed for that cartridge, and that was done by Smith & Wesson in 1857. So literally the first revolver designed for a cartridge and not black powder was for the 22 short, and that again was a tiny little revolver. Since then, countless other small revolvers have been made, and literally up until some of the most recent cartridges introduced to the market have still been designed for the tiny revolvers. So they run the gambit on the timeline of development of firearms since the first cartridge revolver all the way up to some of the most recent cartridges designed. But what are we talking about for the modern mini revolvers? We're talking about a solid steel construction with a single action. They have a spur trigger, so no trigger guard, and that gives them that derringer shape, which is very similar to that first model Smith & Wesson. The calibers go from that first cartridge ever created, the 22 short, then 22 long rifle, 22 Magnum, and again up until some of the most recent cartridges like the 17 HMR and 17 Mach 2. Their cylinders are either going to be sometimes 4, but typically 5 shots, somewhere from an inch to 2-inch barrels, but sometimes longer. The grips are typically wood, but sometimes rubber or plastic. They weigh as little as 4 ounces and usually not more than 6 ounces. And these modern revolvers have been manufactured since 1971 through today. So let's take a look at the companies doing that. Rocky Mountain Arms was the first one to come out with a production tiny revolver. North American Arms Corporation took that first design and improved upon it. Then the key players from Rocky Mountain Arms and North American Arms Corporation got together, created Freedom Arms, and improved again upon the revolver. Then North American Arms Incorporated took the baton from that first North American Arms Corporation. Charter Arms and BC Engineering also created a tiny modern revolver. Let's look at the people behind these companies. Dick Casoul, Wayne Baker, Frank Talley, Sandy Chisholm, Jerry Baber, and Boje Cornelis are the people that are responsible for most of these companies. And I'm going to take a moment to say I'm proud to say I've met everyone on this list except Dick Casoul and Frank Talley. But the other 4 guys I know. I've been able to shake their hands multiple times. I've done interviews with them. As a fan of these small revolvers, I'm really proud to be able to say I've been able to do that. It's neat to be in a place in history, where I was able to actually get in, FaceTime with each of these guys. So let's continue. Dick Casoul, name sounds familiar. He's very famous for his 454 cartridge that he developed back in 1957, and then in 1983 started producing his Freedom Arms Model 83 in the 454, and he's been building some of the largest revolvers ever made, but obviously we're here to talk about the other extreme, and he's also made some of the smallest revolvers ever made. Well, he does make the smallest revolver ever made, the Casoul Model A22S, which was his design back in 1971. Then in 1978, he teamed up with Wayne Baker, and together they improved on that original design with the Freedom Arms Patriot model mini revolver. Dick Casoul is responsible for many patents. I don't have them all listed here, but again, he was a very prolific firearms inventor and gunsmith and cartridge designer. So he has lots of patents, but he's also, just to note, he's responsible for a lot of the mini revolver patents as well as the belt buckle holster. Next, we'll talk about Wayne Baker. Wayne Baker saw Casoul's first 22 short revolver and decided he could improve upon it. So he created North American Arms Corporation and made his improvements and sold that revolver. He eventually sold North American Arms Corp to Frank Talley, who we'll talk about in a moment. But then when he sold North American Arms Corporation, he got together with Dick Casoul, and they created Freedom Arms, and that's where they collaborated and did a further improvement on the revolver to what we call the Patriot from Freedom Arms. And people out there will say that some people say that the Patriot is the ultimate mini revolver, although they were only made from 1978 to, well, I forget the date. We'll see that in a minute here. But Dick Chisholm did end up leaving Freedom Arms in 2008, but Wayne Baker still runs Freedom Arms today. Wayne Baker is now responsible for sort of picking up the baton from Dick Chisholm, doing his own improvements on Chisholm's original design, and then eventually teaming up with Chisholm to come up with the ultimate design in the Freedom Arms revolver. So next, let's take a look at Frank Talley. He's the guy that bought North American Arms Corporation from Wayne Baker. He already had an aerospace manufacturing company, so he bought North American Arms Corporation and ran it as a subsidiary. The company moved to Newbury Park, California, so that leads me to believe that Wayne Baker had the company somewhere, and I don't know if that was in Salt Lake City, Utah, where Rocky Mountain Arms was, or if it was in Freedom, Wyoming, where Freedom's Arms was, or if it was somewhere else. I'm not sure. I still have to find that out. But we know that in 1977, Frank Talley brought North American Arms out to Newbury Park, and those North American Arms 22Ss, the Wayne Baker improvement to the original Chisholm design, are pretty much all dated, are all engraved with the California address, the Newbury Park address. Then the design changed a bit, and they moved to Provo, Utah. Eventually, then they moved to Spanish Fork, and in 1986, Frank Talley sold his company and North American Arms with it to another company. Then we'll move on to Sandy Chisholm. Now, he's the current owner of North American Arms Incorporated. So Sandy started working for Talley Manufacturing, the aerospace company, back in 1981. Then in 86, when it was bought by a third company, Sandy was actually tasked with selling the North American Arms subsidiary. So instead of selling it, he decided to buy it, and in 1991 he bought North American Arms Inc. and since then has been the owner. In 94 he did move the company back to, or the factory back to Provo, Utah. So that's how North American Arms gets from Wayne Baker's original company up to where it is today. Now let's talk about Jerry Babber, another interesting character. I met Jerry in 2012 when we were doing our road trip and visiting all kinds of manufacturers. And Jerry has all kinds of hooks in the water, but one of the things he does is cast precision steel parts for firearms, and that includes the frames for the original Rocky Mountain Arms little revolver for Dick Chisholm, the Freedom Arms frames for Freedom Arms, the North American Arms frames for both Wayne and the company now, as well as for Charter Arms and BC Engineering. So Jerry's actually had his assistance has been valuable to all of the companies that make these modern mini revolvers. I think it's interesting. Again, a real honor to meet somebody that's that involved with the production of these things. And by the way, he's also the guy who owns the patent for the AA-12 automatic shotgun. That's a whole other story. Very interesting character. Next, I'm going to talk about another interesting character, Boje Cornelis. He's the owner of BC Engineering, and he does a modern mini revolver as well called the BC Special. These are made by him by hand in his machine shop. Again, it was an honor to be able to meet Boje, and we spent the day with him and his wife and learned all about these little mini revolvers, and of course the AA-12, which again is a whole other story. But it's neat how some of the smallest little revolvers are intertwined in the gun community to not only all the other places they're in touching, but also a fully automatic shotgun. Okay, so let's take a look at the timeline, how these companies came along, and some of this will be review. Rocky Mountain Arms is the company that started it all, and that was Dick Chisholm's original design. That one lasted from about 71 to 75. Somewhere while it was still going, Jerry Baker started North American Arms Corporation, and he did his improvement to it called the North American Arms improvement, and that's the improvement that North American Arms is really still using today. Then those two got together and created Freedom's Arms and did their third improvement to that original design. Then North American Arms continued on past '89 when Freedom's Arms stopped producing the Mini-Revolver, and all up until today, the North American Arms has still been producing this revolver on that original first improvement to the original design. Charter Arms came along. Their design is completely different. They did it all on their own, and they called that the Dixie Derringer. And again, Bourget at BC Engineering did his complete spin on it, and it's also completely different than the others. So that's the order in which they appeared on the scene then. Next, let's take a little closer look at each one just to wrap up. Rocky Mountain Arms, really cool revolvers. They've got the little hook off the hammer that keeps the cylinder locked in place. They're marked with or they're marked with Salt Lake City, Utah, as their place of production, and they're in that little velvet style box. Then North American Arms came along, again an improvement on that original design. It also came in one of those small boxes, and then it was sold to Frank Talley, who took the baton from there. That's when Wayne Baker and Dick Asul got together, created Freedom Arms. They improved on the design, and they made them up until '98, and in 2008 Asul left. They stopped making them '89. This is an interesting ad that you can take a look at in the PDF, but it basically says that, I think it's saying that North American Arms Corporation had a recall. So I don't know if it was when, it looks like the date on it is '82, so it's interesting to see how that relates to all the rest of this. They obviously weren't all friendly at some point. In 1970, or now we're going to North American Arms Inc., the new company from Frank Talley. So he bought the company from Wayne Baker. He moved it to Newbury Park, California. A year later, he moved it back to Utah. A couple of years later, he moved it to Spanish Fork. Then his company was bought out by another company, and Sandy was brought in to sell off North American Arms. He bought it and eventually moved it back to Provo. So that's, again, a recap on the North American Arms saga. If we take a look at the various stampings, we can see the differences between the California stampings and then the later Spanish Fork and Provo. So there was two different styles of North American Arms. That early North American Arms Corporation has a smooth cylinder and the black plastic grips. The newer models from Utah have the scallop cylinders and the wooden grips for the most part. We were able to take a factory tour back in 2010 at the Provo factory, and we posted that video on YouTube. We'll be posting more footage of that now that we found all the footage. And if you have any interest in seeing what it looks like where they built these things, we tried to do about 15 minutes worth of running the camera in the factory and talking to the guys there. Next, let's move on to Charter Arms, which I'm least familiar with. The companies bounced around both in location and company name over the years. We do know, though, that from 2002 to 2012, they did produce their own version of a Mini-Revolver called the Dixie Derringer. It's interesting in the fact that it has a crossbolt safety. Otherwise, it's very similar to the others. It also has a grip that's very much like a cold steel knife. Next, we have the BC Engineering, Bourget Cornelis. Again, real nice guy. He's a German engineer. He's the guy that's responsible for doing improvements on the Thunder 5, which is the first 410, 45 Colt, and 45 ACP 5-shot revolver, and also the guy that re-engineered, redeveloped the AA-12 to make it an operational full-auto shotgun. So we have a really interesting story about firearms here in the U.S., all wrapped up in these little revolvers. We'll be doing more information about these. Hopefully this has spurred some discussion. What I really hope to do with these videos is encourage people to think about firearms for more than just the pleasure of shooting recreationally and defending yourself. There's a lot of history in these. We invented most of these here in the U.S., and because of that, the roots go deep. And it's there to discover. I'm still finding new things whenever I have the chance to do so, with the help of friends, with the help of books and the internet. It's a lot of fun to see what all's out there and what you don't know yet. There's links to on the PDF that you can get to follow or get a head start on some of this stuff if you want to check it out. We do encourage you to support the organizations that support our freedom. We post information like this on our websites. We thank you for your support, and as always, thanks for watching.
The guys and gals of gunwebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thanks for watching gunwebsites.com.